I never imagined that the one person I would betray would be my own sister. The thought of it seemed impossible, like something that happened in novels or movies, but not in real life, not in my life. Yet, here I am, caught in the web of choices I made, choices that have led me to this point where nothing will ever be the same. I betrayed my sister, the person who had always been there for me, who loved me unconditionally. And I did it with her husband, a man I should never have looked at in any way other than his family. This is my story, a story of how I crossed a line I can never uncross, and how it all began with one moment of weakness. My sister, Lily, was the perfect one. Growing up, she was the golden child, always excelling in everything she did. She was beautiful, smart, and kind, the kind of person everyone wanted to be around. And then there was me, always in her shadow, always trying to live up to the expectations that came with being Lily's little sister. But despite the comparisons, I loved her dearly. She was my rock, my best friend, the person I could always count on, no matter what. When Lily met Tom, I was happy for her. He was everything she deserved, handsome, successful, and utterly devoted to her. They were the perfect couple, the kind that made you believe in true love. I was genuinely happy for them, and when they got married, I was the maid of honor, standing by her side as she promised her life to the man she loved. I never imagined that one day, I would be the one to betray that love. It started innocently enough, as these things often do. Tom and I had always gotten along well. He was easy to talk to, and he had a way of making you feel at ease, like you could tell him anything. After they got married, I spent a lot of time at their house. Lily was my best friend, and I loved being around her, loved the warmth and happiness that radiated from their home. Tom was always welcoming, always happy to see me, and I never thought twice about it. But then, something changed. I can't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but somewhere along the way, I started to notice Tom in a different way. I started to notice the way his eyes would linger on me just a little too long, the way his smile would light up when I walked into the room. At first, I brushed it off, convinced that it was nothing more than my imagination. But as time went on, I found myself drawn to him in ways I didn't understand, ways I knew I shouldn't feel. One evening, Lily had to work late, and Tom and I were left alone in their house. It wasn't the first time it had happened, and I didn't think anything of it as I settled onto the couch with a glass of wine. We talked, as we always did, about life, work, and everything in between. But that night, there was a tension in the air, a sense of something unspoken between us that I couldn't quite put my finger on. As the evening wore on, the conversation turned more personal. We talked about our relationships, about the ups and downs of marriage, and about the things that kept us up at night. I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't expected, sharing things I had never told anyone, not even Lily. And as I talked, I felt a connection between us, something deep and real that I couldn't ignore. At some point during the evening, Tom reached out and took my hand. It was a simple gesture, one that shouldn't have meant anything, but the moment his skin touched mine, I felt a jolt of electricity run through me. I looked up at him, and in his eyes, I saw the same feelings reflected back at me. It was a look that made my heart race, a look that I knew should never have been directed at me. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice filled with something I couldn't quite identify. I don't know how to say this, but I've been feeling something for you, something I know I shouldn't." My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a rush of emotions I couldn't begin to untangle. This was Lily's husband, the man she loved, the man she trusted. How could I feel anything for him? How could I even entertain the thought of betraying her like this? But even as the guilt gnawed at me, I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him, the way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. "Tom, we can't," I whispered, my voice trembling with the weight of the words. "This is wrong. We can't do this." He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. "I know it's wrong, Sarah. But I can't stop thinking about you. I've tried, but I can't." His words sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. How had we gotten here? How had I allowed myself to feel this way about my sister's husband? But even as the guilt washed over me, I couldn't bring myself to pull away. We have to stop, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. We can't do this to Lily. She doesn't deserve this. He sighed, his grip on my hand tightening. I know. But what if this is something more? What if this is something real? His words hit me like a ton of bricks, and I felt my resolve crumbling. I wanted to do the right thing, wanted to walk away before it was too late, but I couldn't. I was too far gone, too lost in the feelings that had been awakened inside me. Before I knew what was happening, Tom leaned in and kissed me. It was a soft, tentative kiss, as if he was giving me a chance to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. The moment our lips met, it was like a dam breaking, releasing all the emotions I had been trying so hard to suppress. I kissed him back with a hunger that surprised even me, and when he deepened the kiss, I felt myself falling, tumbling headfirst into something I knew I shouldn't want but couldn't resist. We broke apart, both of us breathing heavily, our foreheads resting together as we tried to process what had just happened. We can't do this, I whispered, my voice shaking. We can't. I know, Tom replied, his voice filled with regret. But I can't stop myself. I want you, Sarah. And I know you feel the same. His words sent a thrill through me, but it was quickly followed by a wave of guilt so intense it nearly took my breath away. This was my sister's husband, the man she loved, the man she trusted. How could I do this to her? How could I betray her like this? But even as the guilt gnawed at me, I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward Tom, the way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. It was wrong, so wrong, but the temptation was overwhelming, and I found myself unable to resist. We have to be careful, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. No one can ever know about this. Tom nodded, his thumbs gently brushing away the tears that had begun to fall from my eyes. I promise, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. This stays between us. That night, we crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. We spent hours together, tangled in each other's arms, exploring the depths of our desire, our passion. It was intoxicating, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. And when it was over, when we lay together in the aftermath of what we had done, the reality of our betrayal began to sink in. This can't happen again, I said softly, my voice filled with a mixture of regret and longing. We can't keep doing this. Tom sighed, his fingers tracing patterns on my skin. I know, he replied, his voice heavy with emotion. But I don't know if I can stay away from you. His words sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt a pang of guilt so intense it nearly brought me to tears. How had we let things get this far? How had I allowed myself to betray my sister, the person who had always been there for me, who trusted me completely? We have to try, I whispered, my voice trembling. We have to. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I had to see Lily, had to look her in the eye and pretend that everything was normal, that I wasn't hiding a terrible secret that would destroy her if she ever found out. Every time I saw her, the guilt gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the line I had crossed, the betrayal I had committed. Tom and I tried to keep our distance, tried to go back to the way things were before that night. But it was impossible. The attraction between us was too strong, the connection too deep. We kept finding ourselves drawn back together, meeting in secret, stealing moments whenever we could. It was a dangerous game, one that I knew could only end in heartbreak, but I couldn't stop myself. I was addicted to the way he made me feel, to the thrill of the forbidden. And then, one day, everything came crashing down. Lily had planned a weekend getaway for the three of us, just a few days at a cabin in the mountains, a chance to relax and unwind. I knew it was a bad idea, but I couldn't say no without raising suspicion. The thought of being in such close quarters with Tom, with no escape from the tension that had been building between us, filled me with dread. But I couldn't back out. Lily was so excited about the trip, and the last thing I wanted was to disappoint her. So, I went along with it, trying to convince myself that I could keep my feelings in check, that I could get through the weekend without giving anything away. The first day was uneventful. We hiked, we cooked dinner together, and in the evening, we sat by the fire, talking and laughing as if everything was normal. But I could feel the tension between Tom and me, an invisible thread pulling us together even as we tried to maintain a facade of normalcy. Every time our eyes met, my heart would race, and I had to force myself to look away, to focus on anything other than the man sitting just a few feet away from me. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, I found myself unable to sleep. The guilt, the anxiety, the fear of being caught, it all weighed heavily on my mind. I tossed and turned, trying to calm my racing thoughts, but it was no use. Finally, I got out of bed and quietly made my way downstairs to the kitchen, hoping that a glass of water would help. As I stood at the kitchen sink, staring out into the dark woods beyond the cabin, I heard footsteps behind me. My heart leapt into my throat, and I turned to see Tom standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I couldn't sleep," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Me neither," I replied, my voice trembling. The air between us was thick with tension, with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. He took a step closer, and I could see the conflict in his eyes, the same turmoil that was raging inside me. "We need to talk," he said softly, his gaze intense. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. We needed to figure out what we were doing, what this meant, and how we could move forward without destroying everything in our path. But before either of us could say another word, the kitchen light flicked on, and there stood Lily, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. She looked between Tom and me, her expression quickly shifting from surprise to something much darker. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Panic surged through me, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. I couldn't think, couldn't find the words to explain, to lie, to do anything but stand there frozen in place. Tom stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation, but it was too late. Lily had seen the look in our eyes, the way we had been standing too close, the tension that had been simmering between us for weeks. "Sarah, what the hell is going on?" Lily repeated, her voice rising as she took a step closer, her eyes locked onto mine. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. The truth was there, hanging in the air between us, and I knew there was no way to take it back, no way to undo the damage that had already been done. Lily's face twisted with anger and betrayal, and she turned to Tom, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "Tell me the truth, Tom. Have you been sneaking around with my sister?" Tom's face went pale, and I could see the panic in his eyes as he struggled to find the right words. "Lily, it's not what you think," he began, but she cut him off with a sharp, bitter laugh. "Not what I think," she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Then what is it, Tom? Because it looks a hell of a lot like you've been cheating on me with my own sister." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I could feel the walls closing in around me. This was it, this was the moment everything fell apart. "Lily, please," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen." She stared at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and pain. "How could you do this to me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're my sister, Sarah. I trusted you. I trusted both of you." Tom tried to reach out to her, but she recoiled, shaking her head as tears streamed down her face. "Don't touch me," she spat. "Don't ever touch me again." She turned and ran from the kitchen, leaving Tom and me standing there in the aftermath of our betrayal, the reality of what we had done crashing down around us. "I'm so sorry," Tom said softly, his voice filled with regret. "I never meant for this to happen." But his words did little to ease the guilt that was suffocating me. We had crossed a line we never should have crossed, had destroyed the trust of the person who had meant the most to us. And now, we were left to pick up the pieces of the lives we had shattered. The rest of the weekend was a blur of tension and silence. Lily avoided us both, spending most of her time outside, refusing to engage in any conversation. The drive back home was equally unbearable. The comfortable, easy camaraderie that had once existed between us was gone, replaced by a strained, uncomfortable silence. When we returned to the city, the aftermath of our actions continued to unfold. Lily filed for divorce within weeks, cutting off all contact with both Tom and me. She couldn't bear to be in the same room with either of us, and I couldn't blame her. The friendship we had once shared, the bond that had been so strong, was gone, replaced by a gaping wound that would never fully heal. As for Tom and me, the passion that had once consumed us quickly turned to ashes in the wake of the destruction we had caused. We tried to make it work, tried to find solace in each other, but it was no use. The guilt, the shame, the constant reminders of what we had done, it was too much to bear. We drifted apart, each of us lost in our own grief and regret. Paul was devastated when he found out the truth. He tried to understand, tried to forgive me, but in the end, he couldn't look past the betrayal. Our marriage crumbled under the weight of my infidelity, and we parted ways, the life we had built together reduced to memories and regrets. In the end, I was left alone, haunted by the choices I had made, by the people I had hurt, by the life I had destroyed. The spark that had once drawn me to Tom, that had made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years, had turned into a raging fire that consumed everything in its path. And now, all I had left were the ashes, the remnants of a life that would never be the same again.